Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to introduce very shortly Jacqueline, but I couldn't pass this opportunity to see her and share with her how proud am I of being her friend, of being allowed to be part of the Acumen voice in the world, and just to share with you a little bit of who she is. She's enormous. Every time I meet her, I learn more and more. But the best thing she has ever done for me is that they believe in people and in character. No matter what is your character, in character. So I really love that. And I think that is the idea where all the rest of Acumen and all of their smartest idea, she's been proven to the world, pivot. So Jacqueline has done lots of things before Acumen that she launched in 2001, related with the investment banking and all the New York thing that you could imagine. She did it, and if she could did it there, she could do it everywhere. And then she moved to Rwanda and to Africa and really lived the lives that poor people live there. And then she put everything together. And in 2001, she launched her brilliant idea of the world could be changed by investments and by people, really by people. What is behind the investment and the businesses and everything? People and their characters. And besides all of that, and she's very humble and doesn't want me to say that, but she's been chosen as one of the 25 smartest people in the world. And her ideas are changing the world. And luckily, we are now, since 3, 4, 5 years, talking about this new capitalism. She started, I think, like me, thinking that there is a different way of doing philanthropy. But now she got the solution and the tool for a new economy, which is bigger, and the impact is going to be humongous. So I don't want to rob more time from her. She wanted to say something about the Women's Day today, so I'll leave you the floor for a while, and I just come back a little bit more to talk about the fellowship in Spain, and I'll leave you with Luigi. So tell us something about the women leadership today.
Sure. Do you want me to start then, Maria Angeles?
Just one word on women's, whether a woman
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, I mean, if we're going to talk about International Women's Day, we have to start by talking about all women. And Maria Angeles, I'm going to start by focusing on you. And that it is truly about women seeing great potential in one another and releasing the energy, the possibility of one another. I think that's really the spirit of International Women's Day, and that it's not just about women, but it's about all of us, because for too long, women have been systematically excluded, overlooked, underestimated, and undervalued. And that's changing in extraordinary ways, but it doesn't change by itself. It changes when individuals decide it has to change. And it's been a theme of my life. As you said, Maria Angeles, going back to starting Duterembere, a microfinance bank for women in Rwanda, to now where we make big investments and yet we don't have a women's fund. We integrate women into every investment in which we participate, and increasingly are finding the language, the tools, the skills to give every entrepreneur, every company, the consciousness, which really is the moral revolution, to build in ways that truly ensure justice and fairness, that women are involved, that they're empowered, that they gain wealth. And what we see over and over when looking at poverty is not only that women are most impacted by poverty, but that if you give women the tools to get themselves out of poverty, they bring many people along with them. And so there's no better day to be talking about this book, to be with my friend, to be thinking about Acumen Academy Spain in collaboration with the Open Value Foundation, which has been such a partner in bringing that ethos through the world. And so happy International Women's Day to everyone. And Maria Angeles, just thank you. And thank you to the whole OVF for all of the work and your team in making this happen.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, I know there are some Acumen Fellows here. I just wanted to tell them that Jacqueline is very proud of all the cohort. We have the last one and this new one, and the achievement you're getting in the government, opening new rural areas for new opportunities for poor people in Spain. So she knows all of the things that happen here, and we are very happy and full of hope in this new cohort that we launched almost a month ago. And I just want to leave you with the book because everything is in there. So Luigi, if you want to start the interview.
Absolutely. Well, more than proud, Mariana. I just assumed that would be something Luis Alberto and I would be talking about together, the fellows, is that when we talk about the future, the fellows are the future. And they really have already taught me that there's a new generation that is thinking about leadership, not from an individual perspective, but from a collective perspective. And I find that so deeply inspiring. And I think the pandemic has accelerated it. So couldn't be prouder and cannot wait to gather in Spain, in community, with the fellows and with you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And let's go with the interview.
Thank you very much, Maria Angeles, for the introduction. Thank you, Jacqueline, for being here. Welcome to the Open Value Foundation. And we will talk about your new book, the Spanish version of Manifiesto para una Revolución Moral. That's the Spanish title of your Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, which just came out. But this is just a pretext. God knows where the conversation will lead us. And that's also an invitation to our viewers to send in their questions through the little question and answer box that you see on the interface, right? And I will pose your questions to Jacqueline. And also we will try to cover some of the topics that I would like to discuss with her. But first, let's say Duterim Bere, okay? Let's march forward with enthusiasm, Jacqueline. How about that?
I love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Do you know that enthusiasm is a fantastic word? It's a very interesting word because the etymology, it comes from the Greek entheos, the God within. He who has zeus, the God within. So enthusiastic means an action prompted by the gods within. So, what better way to start this conversation?
I love that. Well, if we're going to speak about etymology,
go ahead,
Alberto, then I think, particularly since we're in Spain, that the word moral can be misunderstood easily. And it's something that Maria Angeles has actually talked to me about in the past, that when I think about moral leadership, moral revolution, I am absolutely not talking about a set of rules prescribed from a higher authority, but rather an orientation in the world that moves away from seeing success as money, power, and fame, and profit, and the individual at the center of all of our systems, but rather insisting on our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth at the center. And so I loved that you started with the etymology of enthusiasm, and I think it's just really important. Because the word moral can be misunderstood as righteousness and coming from a place of I know better, when if you read this book, it's actually quite the contrary. It's that we equally have to know what we do know and what we do not know and move from that place. I love in the chat that moral is moral all. I love that.
Yes, more of all. Yes, certainly. What prompted you, Jacqueline, to write this new book, the Manifesto for a Moral Revolution?
Well, in her introduction, Maria Angeles talked about 20 years in coming. And I would say two things. The first was having made over 100 investments and worked with probably 1,000 change agents over the course of the 35 years that I've been doing this work, I began to realize that so often, and Acumen is part of this problem, if you will, or was, so often we look at the idea, we look at spreadsheets, we look at the financials, and they're all important. And we overlook the character of the entrepreneur. And when you look at those individuals who have taken an idea like solar electricity, and they've brought it over the course of 10, 15 years to 100 million people, what distinguishes them is not just brilliance or their supply chain, it's their character, that they are listeners, that they are holding a set of skills that we don't teach enough in any of our schools. And so that was the first piece. The second was that we are in a moment, and I wrote this book before the pandemic, but we are in a moment where all of our systems have been broken open, laid bare for how inadequate they are. We've seen how our inequality is so dangerous and unsustainable, and yes, immoral. And yet we haven't reimagined institutions to take their place. And so we need to build that new moral compass. But there isn't a roadmap to do so, because it means deconstructing and reconstructing a system that has only one bottom line for 50 years, profit. And not saying we don't need profit, but the contrary, we need our organizations to be self-sustaining, but a complete reimagining. And that was really where the book came from, because we don't have a how-to, but we do have role models and we do have business models that have made significant change.
Mm-hmm. I've selected some fragments that I would quote to you as, I'm fond of. And the first one is as follows. A manifesto is a public declaration of intentions. This is one for all who hear the call of moral leadership, guiding principles to dream and build a better world, coordinate a moral compass set by those already leading this journey of change. Who are these people? Who are you writing for?
These people, they're the Acumen Academy Fellows. They are individuals who are looking not to tear down necessarily. They are looking to build. They are truly what I would call the builders. They are willing to be uncomfortable. They know that the world that we're in, which has so much beauty and potential in it, also is not living up to its potential. And yet they don't just want to complain about it. They want to do something about it. And so it is to every one of us, because I actually think we're a really big group who is tired of the talk and wants to move into being part of the change.
Mm-hmm. You also write that this is a declaration of principles that is aspirational, a sort of a moral compass, a daily reminder of who we aim to be and who we practice being. So it doesn't seem to be set on stone, right? You don't want that, do you?
No. And I think this goes to the difference between moral, which can be taken as righteousness, and moral, which is a lifelong journey to mastery. And that I have failed so many times, not only in big ways in terms of trying to create real solutions to poverty, but in daily ways where I have failed myself in terms of living up to the aspirational values of Acumen's Manifesto. Whether it's overlooking a person unintentionally and feeling a sense of shame that I was too busy to take note, or bigger things in terms of allowing an investment committee to, hold that balance between patient capital being, financially oriented and patient capital being impact oriented. And so it is the aspirational that allows us to take the self-reflection and hopefully keep us moving. But perfection is not a possibility. And in fact, I think part of the human journey is to find perfection in imperfection, because I think that's the best we can do.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 1 is entitled "Just Start," and and I quote: "You may not yet have a crystal clear sense of your purpose. That's okay. It'll grow with you. But if you have an inkling that you'd like that you like your life to be about something bigger than yourself, listen to that urge. Follow the thread. The world needs you. Just start." So it is an encouragement to walk and start, move forward without having all the answers, all the information, and the certainty of that you will reach your destination, which is something that we all demand. It seems that we are uncomfortable in uncertainty, but that's the world, that's life.
Certainly now.
Yes.
Yeah. So many people will call me or email me, and it's the reason I wrote that chapter. And they'll say, "Jacqueline, I want to do this work, but I haven't figured out what my purpose is." And I actually think that that is the wrong starting point. Purpose doesn't find people who are sitting at the starting blocks waiting for purpose to come to them. Purpose comes to those people who, as you said, ask not, am I, who am I? Am I better, stronger, richer, more powerful? But rather, what does the world need from me? And is there a problem that I'm curious about and I want to help solve? Take a step toward finding out more about that problem. Take a step toward looking at how you might solve that problem. And that step will lead you to another step. And it is that thread, if you will, that unspools. And as it unspools, we find ourselves moving closer to our purpose and, frankly, to ourselves.
So your path will reveal itself as you move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a path of discovery, self-discovery and purpose discovery, right?
Yeah, you don't think about self-discovery, but in doing it, because you come up against so many obstacles that are difficult, that it's inevitable that you learn where you are strong and where you need to strengthen.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 2 is entitled "Redefine Success." Do you think, Jacqueline, that we are limited or even imprisoned by old notions and ideas about what success really means?
I definitely think that too many of us, I think it's changing. Too many of us are imprisoned, and I think it's an important word that you chose, by old definitions, worn out definitions. And if we think about what we say publicly, is that with the pandemic, the constant search for money, power, and fame is not getting us the world that we want to live in. Certainly not the world we want to leave to our children. And by those old definitions, I would say that we don't even need successful people. We need healers. We need creators of beauty. We need solution builders. We need dreamers. We need music makers. We need those individuals who look out at the world and ask what they can do for it, rather than ask themselves, what is the world doing for them? And so, yes, I think we're imprisoned, because going in those directions can often mean going against parents, friends, institutions, a status quo that in too many ways takes our courage from us. And yet, I think there's a collective agreement that the old ways aren't working. And so it is to the seekers who will practice courage to be the change makers. And that's what's been so thrilling about the work with Acumen, is to see those individuals who have changed millions of lives. They may not have gotten financially wealthy, but if the definition could be grounded in the amount of energy you're giving to other people, then the world would change.
In chapter 3, you invite the reader to cultivate moral imagination. I think that's a beautiful concept. That's a beautiful phrase you coined there. What is moral imagination?
So moral imagination starts with empathy, and many of us feel empathy. But if that's all we feel, then it's almost tantamount to feeling sorry for someone, sympathy for someone, and that reinforces the status quo. Moral imagination requires moving beyond empathy, immersing ourselves, getting close to a problem and understanding that problem from other people's perspectives, then figuring the systems that get in their way, and then making the change. I think I learned about moral imagination when I first was at university. And I had signed up to bring a Christmas dinner to a low-income community, a family who I'd never met, just 30 minutes down the road from my university. And I had a big party the night before. And although I'm not Spanish, we stayed up all night dancing and drinking, and it was just wonderful. But I wasn't feeling very well when I had to get up in the morning with my friend, my roommate, and we packed the car with a turkey and all of the toys for the children and the trimmings, and we drove to this part of Charlottesville that was very poor. And we got up to a house that was a shack. I had not really seen very many houses like that in my life. And there was a dog on the porch. And suddenly I felt so much shame that I had no idea who the family was. I didn't know what the children cared about. I didn't know if the parents wanted their children to know that somebody was bringing them Christmas. And so I said to my friend, just keep the car stopped. I dropped the goods in the car. I dropped my things. I ran the goods to the porch of this house. I dropped them and I jumped back in the car. And I realized that while my empathy was powerful and I did a good thing in some ways, it lacked moral imagination. That had I had moral imagination, I would have asked myself, was I willing to do the work of getting close and understanding what the people really needed? If I wasn't willing, was I willing to find an organization that would do that work? And even more so, what would it take to ensure that that family could have the wherewithal to buy their own toys, to decide what they wanted for their own Christmas? And it was that juxtaposition, that tension, if you will, between what I wanted for the world and the systemic change that was needed for the world that I think opened up my own moral imagination.
I think this is connected to another quite beautiful phrase that I found in the book, the one-armed hug, showing and displaying enough support to stand with someone. That's the empathy part, I guess, but not so much that you disable them, right?
Yeah, and that's very much connected to the principle or the practice of accompaniment. That again, and I think elites do this unintentionally all the time, that we see someone who has a problem and we think, I can solve that problem. But that doesn't help anything. It is when we, again, have the courage and the vision to see the problem, to acknowledge the other person, and to help that other person build her own muscles so that ultimately she can solve it themselves. And that's a big but nuanced difference.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 11 is entitled Accompany Each Other, right? And I'll quote, "We can choose to build new systems grounded in a moral framework premised on the belief that we are here on Earth to serve others and to sustain our planet for the next generation. That starts with a simple, dedicated act of accompanying each other." And you say, we are each other's destiny. Another beautiful phrase.
Thank you. Again, seeing it everywhere, that if we saw ourselves as part of each other, if we saw in this great pandemic the opportunity for us to reimagine our systems, we would realize that changing poverty is not just about access to markets. People need to have the capability to to interact with markets once they have access, and to get away from those conversations that it's about the market, it's capitalism, it's socialism. We need elements of all of this. And so a company that has really reinforced for me how we could build accompaniment into the way that we structure our economy is named Everytable. It's actually a company in Los Angeles, in a low-income part of Los Angeles, Compton. And it was started because Sam Polk, the entrepreneur, saw that there was a food desert, no ability to buy affordable food for low-income people inside this community. And he started by making a nonprofit, but he knew it wouldn't grow fast enough for the more than 1 million people in that community. So he started a fast, nutritional, affordable restaurant and named Everytable. And people in the community so appreciated food they valued and enjoyed, and they were seeing themselves as employees, that this restaurant grew from 1 to 8. On the first day of lockdown, it became clear to Sam that his whole business model would go away, but more than that, his purpose in starting Everytable was to bring affordable, healthy food to the community. And so he put on social media, if you need food, let us know. We'll deliver it to you. If you can't afford to pay for it, let us know and we'll deliver it anyway. And if you're willing to pay it forward, here's a link. And pretty much overnight, there were, thousands and thousands of people in Los Angeles put little but bits of money, crowdfunding, to pay forward these meals. And then government partnered with the company to enable it to deliver food to homeless shelters. And over the course of the pandemic, this company has delivered over 3 million meals to low-income people. They've radically expanded jobs. Sam himself has become even more radical, I would say, with the moral imagination. And now he realizes that if I really want this to be a mechanism, not just to bring food to the city and jobs, but to bring wealth to Black and Latino people, then he built Everytable University, where he could take the best of his employees, train them in how to be a franchisee or run their own restaurant. Then he goes to the foundations to bring patient capital, 7-year, 2% debt that they will lend to the company, to lend to the employees that have gone through the university so they can start their own Everytable franchise. He guarantees $40,000 per year for 3 years and accompanies these individuals with this vision that in the future, the owners of the company will be the employees of the company who come from the community. And so suddenly you can imagine a new leadership model for a new economy based in, of, and by community. It doesn't happen by itself. It requires the right kind of capital, the right kind of character, and the right community. And all of us have to learn to accompany each other better to make that happen.
Yes. One of our viewers, Belen, sends in a question. She writes, what would be the role of human-centered design in this idea of going beyond empathy? Can it be done from an office, mapping actors or experience? Being there and part of it is necessary?
Yeah, I actually think human-centered design is grounded in the moral imagination. It requires this idea of immersion, getting close, and importantly, seeing low-income people as customers, not just as passive recipients of charity. And that doesn't mean I think low-income people should pay market prices. And in fact, some of the most interesting designs have them not paying very much at all or anything. But it takes the time to go to the people, sit with them, understand what they like and don't like. The company I mentioned, Delight, is probably the best example of that, when Sam Goldman and Ned Tozin decided they wanted to bring solar light and electricity to low-income populations, they didn't go with their solar technology that then they tried to foist upon other populations. They went to the people they wanted to serve. They listened deeply to what they valued and what they did not value. They changed their model, human-centered design. And I think one of the most extraordinary moments for me, which goes to defining success, was when, after they had reached, almost 100 million people, I was sitting in a village in Rajasthan, and a woman was explaining to me why she converted from dirty kerosene, which she had been using, to solar light. And she said, one of the things that she said was that when her solar lantern, which emitted this noxious smoke, was in the house, she was always nervous, not only that she was hurting the health of her children, but that they might get hurt if it fell over, or worse. And I said, that's so interesting, because the founder of this company, madam, decided that he would just start and build a solar company when his neighbor's kerosene lantern fell over and burned down the house and almost killed his eldest son. The woman leaned forward with tears coming down her face, and she said, madam, please, would you thank that young man for me? When you think about success, again, just as who makes the most money, Sam and Ned would never fit into that category. But when you think about what it feels like to have a person on the other side of the world who you may never meet or never know, whose life has been changed fundamentally and feels this sense of gratitude for these acts that you have done, well, that success, that does not come without human-centered design, without that act of moral imagination and immersion. Designing from the perspective of those you want to serve, not through the lens only of your own imagination.
Mm-hmm. I will now jump to chapter number 7, because I think it's fitting. You mentioned, you hinted at the issues of running a business and acquiring a certain scale. On chapter 7, entitled "Hold Opposing Values in Tension," you recount your meeting with a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And I will quote his reply to you. He would say, "I still don't understand why you're thinking so small. This is the problem with social enterprise. You work at the margins without really changing anything. 500 houses? Why even bother?" He was suggesting building 5 million homes, right? Now, the power of thinking big versus the power, perhaps necessity, of thinking small in the business projects and ventures that you're discussing and you're reviewing, right?
Yeah, I think at the beginning you have to think big and small.
Okay.
Right? That I started Acumen because I wanted to fundamentally change the way the world tackled poverty. Now I want to be part of eradicating poverty. And so I will never fulfill that. I will never succeed even by my own metric in my lifetime. On the other hand, we had to start with where we were and what we had. And the situation in Pakistan at that point was that in this nation of over 200 million individuals, there had not been a single mortgage ever made, even to the middle class, forget about the poor. And so to say, oh, in 5 years, we're going to go from 0 after all of history to 5 million felt like the kind of fool's errand that might make us feel good about ourselves, but was ultimately a lie. And that what we needed before we could go to the big was to build a business model that worked for a group of people that was sustainable and robust enough that we could take it to another level. Most things take a lot longer than you think it will. And I would say that is also the case of AMC, which is the name of the company with housing. Javad Aslam, the entrepreneur, embodies this idea of holding opposing values in tension. He has constructed a mortgage system that is accountable while it's also generous. In other words, there are generous terms to the people that are buying houses for the first time in their lives. He understands how low trust is. He understands how low income is. He understands that people need time and that sometimes people need grace payments before they, if they have a bad month. He also understands that if he doesn't create financial viability, he will never have a model that can go to 5 million. And that's hard. We don't talk about that when we talk about moral leadership, and we don't talk about that when we talk about social enterprise. Those are the moments of real leadership. How do you navigate when a group of people stop making payments on their houses? You throw them out, and the media covers you and says, "You heartless person, we thought you cared about the poor." You don't make them pay, and you suddenly don't have a financially viable model. And Javad has found a way to be both hard-headed and soft-hearted, so that he not only created the first viable housing company for the poor in Pakistan, sold that company, half the company, but he's also caught the attention then of policymakers and investors across the nation, so that now not only is he working to take the model across Pakistan, but he sits on the Prime Minister's Housing Commission, who has as a goal, ironically, 5 million houses across Pakistan. That's how change it makes. And now 20 years in, what I would say to the social entrepreneur who's just starting out is that these put downs at the beginning, well, you're so small, well, you sound rather naive, aren't you too idealistic, are code for cynicism. And there is no ally of the status quo like cynicism. And so now, 20 years in, I can point to those little ideas that started at the edges, which I frankly think is where innovation is bred and born, that have turned into $100 million companies, or the 4th largest ambulance company in the world, or a chicken factory that has now been credited with reducing child malnutrition in Ethiopia by 11%. Mm-hmm. It takes time. And it's why we can't be the change ourselves. We need to do it in community with others, because this journey is not an easy journey. And people will be underestimating you through most of it. And but make no mistake, social enterprise is the way to lend a humanitarian ethos with the rigors of market discipline. It's just not held down by ideology. It focuses on what works, and that's what we need.
Mm-hmm. What is the role of government in supporting or helping agents of change accomplish these changes?
Government
as partners
is massive
in business.
And I actually think we need more and have more change agents within government. It's also difficult to be a change maker in an institution that is a bureaucracy. However, we need these change agents in every single one of our sectors. There have been very few companies, Luigi, that have scaled with acumen that have not partnered with government. And there's a huge opportunity today. You see it even in the US, where the private sector has developed vaccines very, very quickly. Government has partnered to get vaccines for free to the public. We need more partnerships like that, where where private capital and private initiative can innovate, move, listen to customers, in the way that the private sector is capable of doing, with the humility of recognizing that to reach those who don't have the financial wherewithal to afford those goods, especially in areas like health, like information, like education, we have to ensure that every one of our citizens has access regardless of their ability to pay. Government has to play a critical role. And it's why I get depressed when I hear these conversations about capitalism and socialism. What is exciting to me is, can we get under to the values and ask ourselves, what would it take to actually use the right kind of capital and the right kind of focus on solving the problem? We will not solve them without government. We will not solve them without the private sector. And importantly, we won't solve them without philanthropy and the civil society. And that's got to be part of the reimagining.
I will now read to you some of the questions that our viewers are sending in, starting with one from Araceli. She says, this is a question from a group of fellows. How does the fellowship fit in all this? What do you hope to achieve through the fellowship program? And why a fellowship in Spain?
The fellowship for me has always been at the heart of all of this. Maria Angeles said it best, that everything else I'm talking about is tools. The kind of capital you use, the role of government, understanding where markets work, and just as critically, understanding where markets fail, learning to hold opposing values in tension. What makes the difference in the world is leadership. And I dare say it's moral leadership. We don't have a lot of role models right now in the world who are leading on behalf of others rather than themselves, to a point where I fear that an entire generation has lost trust in most of our institutions and certainly in authority. We don't even believe that people are telling us the truth, and we don't know how to find the truth. And so the idea of Acumen Academy and the idea of the fellowship is to very deliberately reach out nation by nation, identify an extraordinary group of individuals who are on that path, find them in a diverse way across race, class, ethnicity, language, tribe, and make a 30-year commitment to them, because that's how long change takes. So that in 20, 30 years, these individuals not only are leading important institutions in civil society, in government, in the corporate worlds, but unlike our leaders of today, they know each other and they understand the real issues of their nation. And beyond that, they are connected to a community of change agents like themselves across the world. So if there's an innovation in Zimbabwe that is important for Spain, we should find it, and vice versa. I can't tell you how moving it was, why Spain, how moving it was when I first told our fellows in India, Pakistan, and East Africa that Maria Angeles and Open Value Foundation were bringing Acumen Academy to Spain, because they felt that it was recognition that in the rich, quote unquote, rich countries, there's a new humility that recognizes that we have many of the same problems that those in the quote unquote poor countries have. There was also a sense that we were all in it together, and that they really wanted to learn from Spain. And when I told the fellows in Colombia, I happened to be with a journalist who was Spanish, and she started crying too. And I said, why? And she said, because even in my family, there are so many divisions based on those who are from Barcelona and those who are from Madrid. And everything that you're saying about Colombia also is resonant with me as someone from Spain. And so my dream is that we start to have these conversations within and across to realize that we are truly in this together, and that we are only going to solve our problems if we look out at the world and find the best innovations wherever they may exist and bring them to other places, but to understand ourselves in the context of something bigger.
And that brings us to chapter number 5. You are the ocean in a drop. And let me quote Walt Whitman, Song of Myself, whom you quote in your book. I am large, I contain multitudes. And you also quote the Sufi poet, Rumi. You're not a drop in the ocean, you are the ocean in a drop. These ideas connect very much with what you're saying.
Yeah, we too often, and I think you're seeing a rise of this in this moment of insecurity and fear. Too often when we think about identity, we use it in ways that divide us from each other. We create an other that is separate from ourselves. And the incredible writer Ami Malouf talks about identity in a different way. And he recognizes these layers that we have inside of ourselves. And he says that if we could understand that we all have many parts of ourselves. I'm a woman, I'm an American, I'm a social entrepreneur, I'm a global citizen, I love to dance, I love color, I'm the eldest child, I was raised Catholic. There are many, many parts of who I am. But if you threaten one part, I risk becoming only that, almost a caricature of myself. And in insecure times, it's really easy for demagogues to prey on those insecurities that we have. And then we can become those caricatures and do terrible things to each other. We've seen that in America. We've seen that across the world. And so learning to use identity and the different parts of your identity as a way to connect to each other becomes a vital tool of moral leadership. And I think it is a tool we practice within the Acumen Academy.
Mm-hmm. Another question from our viewers, Borja. He says, companies are definitely an incredible tool to foster this moral imagination, but there is many other spheres that must be involved to foster this transformation. So how can we enhance this change in institutions, universities, etc.?
I mean, that is, as Open Value Foundation knows, this is very much on our minds. I think the good news in this time of breaking open is twofold. One, every institution knows that it has to change. And our particularly higher education realizes that the model we have, where we spend a lot of money to come together for a small group of elites and learn, is broken. And so you're watching universities across the world reach out to look for new models that are more relevant to the world. At Acumen, we're very much focused on partnering with some of those universities to bring that character building component into the university. And that is something that Acumen Academy in Spain is also thinking about. Where are those partnerships that we can build so that some of these hard skills, like identity and holding opposing values and tension and practicing courage, can actually be part of the core curriculum rather than something you do on the side. And then the second thing I would say is that we are the stories we tell, and that everyone on this call can be thinking about the stories that matter and telling stories in new ways about not only who we are, but who those who have been too often left out of the stories are and need to be.
Mm-hmm. I will quote now from your book, as regards stories. You say, we must take the harder path of telling stories that hold our truths, both the ugly and the beautiful, while remaining laser focused on the possible. Quite nice. Thank
you. Well, true. Sometimes people hear me and they say, oh, well, she's so idealistic. And I say, I worked in a nation that went through a genocide. I have been held at gunpoint too many times. I have been bribed. I have seen extortion. I have had to deal with terrible corruption. I have felt humiliated more times than I could say. It hasn't all been beautiful. But being human is not only beautiful. And yet everywhere we look, in every community, we find there's beauty to be found. And I think that this is the story we don't tell social entrepreneurs either, or anybody who wants to make change. If you're signing up for this life of change, you are signing up for the difficult. You are not signing up for an easy life. And yet, at every step of the way, the privilege of being able to interact with people who are also yearning, striving, stretching themselves, offers untold beauty. And in the communities that are often hardest hit, beauty pops up in the most unexpected of places. And so I talk about the beautiful struggle. It is not to dismiss the difficult and the anguish and the pain that is a part of life, but it is to recognize that in each of those places, and I dare say each of those moments, we can also choose to embrace the beautiful. And that is what helps us ultimately sustain, which is so important for this work.
Mm-hmm. Irene, one of our viewers, would like to ask you, well, she says, thank you so much for this, Jacqueline. I think the carrot, in quotes, for those that join the moral revolution is pretty clear and appealing. But do you think we also need some sticks, in quotes, for those that work against it, those that sustain an unfair system? If so, what could those be?
I think this is about, I think less in carrots and sticks than more in what are the policies that we need. That we are the system, we create the system, we can change the system. And so I would rather look at it that way, that there is voluntary, carbon markets. I'd also love to see a carbon tax so that we are actually bringing in the real costs of how we destroy the environment, and charging our corporations for that. I'd actually love to see a global tax on our platform companies that are working across the world, but are playing with the tax system that has kept them less accountable, because there's a huge opportunity for us then to take those resources and ensure that every human being on the planet has access to health and education. And we know what the models are now for how we can create those. We're starting to see real conversations about living wage and what does it mean. And I've been deeply inspired by our entrepreneurs in Latin America that are, I think, at the forefront at looking at new economic models for the farmers. At what point can we bring that to policymakers to say, this shouldn't be a nice on the side that is only consumer driven. This should be the model. And whether you ever make the change in government, because that can take so long, what I also deeply believe and see is that more and more corporations see the writing on the wall, and they realize that with a new generation of employees and customers and shareholders, if they don't look at how they treat the workers and the farmers and the earth, they're not going to have customers, they're not going to have employees, and they're not going to have enough shareholders. And so the question is, I think for all of us, we know what the inevitable is. How do we push the inevitable? And that is some of the most exciting work that we can do, because it's never been more of a possibility than it is right now.
My colleagues here are giving me a signal to round up our conversation, and I would like to share with the viewers and also hear your comments about this one final excerpt from your book. It belongs to chapter 13, Embrace the Beautiful Struggle. And I quote, "In whatever form faith takes for you, I wish you a reservoir from which you can draw sustenance. May you find ways and rituals to remind you to be present in the world, to be grateful. Remember that in the struggle there is a beauty that endures. But most important, remember that the beauty is inside you if you let it be.
Thank you. I mean, I always laugh when particularly young people say, how can you be so old and still so passionate about this work? And I think it really is, it's twofold. It's committing to things that are so big you won't solve them in your lifetime. And to keeping that faith inside that tomorrow can be better. And making that a choice, making that a decision. And that I think that is the definition of hope and of faith. And we're reminded of it. I talked about beauty before, but we're also reminded of it in the many different ways we practice, whether it is through prayer or through poetry or through being in nature or through the arts, music. Each of us can come to that on our own. But my wish for everyone who does want to make change is to be deliberate about finding those parts that allow that centering, because this work is so long.
Jacqueline Novogratz, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for such a beautiful interview.